Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. If you haven't done so already, please rename yourself with your year of graduation or the year that you or the organization that you're with. Welcome. We're so happy that you're here today. My name is Ellen Still, and I am the Associate Director of Alumni Relations at Emmanuel. Also joining on the call today is my colleague, Alexis Scrima, Alumni Relations Coordinator, and Emmanuel College Class of 2021. After Daniela's presentation today, we will have a casual and open discussion and encourage everyone to take turns adding to that discussion. Please bear with us as we get into a natural rhythm of the conversation, and please remain on mute unless you are speaking. Questions for Daniela can also be submitted via the chat or Q&A function located at the bottom of your Zoom screen throughout the talk. Please feel free to raise your hand too if that's more comfortable for you. We are so excited to present the first installment for 2023 of our Emmanuel College Alumni Spotlight Series. It's my pleasure to introduce Daniela Gomes Rodrigues, Emmanuel College Class of 22. Daniela graduated with a Bachelor of Arts degree in sociology with a concentration in social inequality and social justice, and minors in both education and history. Along with her mother and younger brother, Daniela moved to the United States when she was 8 years old and grew up in Brockton, Massachusetts. During her time at Emmanuel, Daniela served in many leadership roles, including resident assistant, president of the Black Student Union, and the Emmanuel College programming team, as well as being a shift manager in the Gene Yockey Center. Daniela also participated in additional extracurricular activities, including an alternative spring break, the social justice trip with Emmanuel's Center for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and working as a research assistant in the Lifespan Lab for Dr. Claire Mehta, Associate Professor of Psychology. She now works as the volunteer program manager at 826 Boston, a writing, tutoring, and publishing nonprofit based in Boston, which transforms Boston public school students into published authors, builds their arsenal of literacy skills, and boosts their confidence with creative writing projects. As the volunteer program manager, Daniela is responsible for leading the team that recruits, retains, and builds up the volunteer cohort that supports 826 programming. Daniela also serves as the co-chair for the team DEI committee at 826 Boston. Presently living in Roxbury, Daniela is currently applying for education leadership graduate programs with the goal of continuing to serve as a leader in the educational ecosystem that enforces equitable policies and empathetic learning practices. Welcome, Daniela. We are so happy that you're here with us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate that. I definitely put that bio together, but like hearing things, and I'm like, did I do that? I did do all those things. And I don't know how I did that all in my short time at Emmanuel, but we made it happen. So I'm super grateful to be able to be here and share my experience with y'all and talk about something that I'm super passionate about. I'm going to now share my screen, so bear with me if that takes a second or two to figure out how exactly to get this done.
We got this.
All right. Can everyone see my presentation? Great, awesome. And it's also so wonderful to see so many familiar faces, from professors to students and staff members. I appreciate you all taking the time to be here today. So my presentation is titled Finding Belonging in Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging, the term, learning to intentionally build community. So I always start any presentation that I do give a lot of those at 826 Boston with volunteers and team members, with a set of norms so that we're on the same page for each presentation. And the set of norms that I set are always different. I try to take in the message that I want to send. I take in the audience that I'm presenting to, and I take in assumptions that might be taken away from what I'm saying. For this specific presentation, I want to be intentional with the norms because I recognize there may be folks on here that are looking for inspiration as they supervise others. And I also realize that there may be folks on the call who share some of my identities, but have had them show up in different ways. I want us to agree that I am not the expert in this call. I want to share the stage with you all. I say that because my presentation is not based on facts and numbers, but rather my own feelings and experiences. I am a feelings kind of girl, and my heart is in everything that I do, and I really don't know how to be any other way, and I wouldn't want to have it any other way. With that, I encourage you all to take what I say as a point of inquiry, where you may be left with so many questions at the end of this, and those are probably some of the same questions that I grapple with every day in a role that requires caring for folks. When presenting, I would usually not go into as much detail when sharing presentation norms, other than encouraging folks to chime in and maybe set some of their own norms. But since I am here to talk to you about fostering belonging, I figured I could include some ways in which I try to incorporate it in my role now and the tasks that I do. Oops, sorry. So I want to start by introducing myself a little bit and a little bit of my story. So I moved to the United States when I was 8 years old, and I will not lie, I completely hated it here. I cried just about every other day, begging my mom to send me back to my grandmother, and she did not, and we're still here today. From the time I moved to the US until I was 15 years old, I was undocumented. Right there in my early childhood, I learned to keep a part of myself hidden. Today, I have been a US citizen for just over 2 years, and now I feel comfortable openly talking about that experience. But at the time, I wouldn't even whisper my residency status to anyone. I don't think my mom ever even told me that I couldn't share that piece of information with people. I just knew that it was something that I should not talk about. I didn't realize until recently that this experience of keeping my business to myself was something that I had internalized, but I think I'll get into that a little bit more as I move on in the presentation. I was raised by both my grandmother and my mother, women who made it clear to me that they were modeling how a strong, independent woman should exist in the world. Today, although I still think of them as strong and independent women, I would argue that there's more than one way to exist as a human who embodies these characteristics. I was also raised as my mother's only daughter and a big sister. Culturally, so much responsibility has been placed on me as the oldest daughter to help raise my brothers, especially in a single parent household. So this is how I've come to be attached to mentorship, both because I didn't have any older siblings to guide me, but because if there is one role on this earth that I put much energy into and I'm confident I could do with my eyes closed, it's be a big sister. These are some of the small parts of myself that I share, so you can kind of get an idea of how I came into Emmanuel and how they've been helpful for me as I continue, and they will be helpful for us as we continue through this presentation. So as I move into speaking about my experience at Emmanuel, before that, I kind of want to just talk about what does belonging look like. So I will share with you an analogy I learned from one of my coworkers at 826 Boston that I enjoyed listening to because it was exactly what I was doing through student leadership at Emmanuel, and I didn't even know it. You can search this analogy up online to learn more about it, but I'll quickly summarize it for us. And I just want to set a reminder that analogies don't fully encompass issues that exist within a subject. It's more just meant to provide us with a shared understanding so that we can start a dialogue. Okay, so here we go. This analogy refers to a party and what DEIB would look like in reference to that party. So imagine you are invited to a party. When you're invited to a party, diversity is different people being invited to that party. Equity is being able to attend the party. This means we all have our own necessary resources so that the party itself is accessible for us. Inclusion at a party is when you're asked to dance or offered refreshment. This looks and feels like you're being involved throughout the experience. And lastly, belonging is deciding the music, decorations, or food for the party. It feels like you were included in the party planning and your music was played and your favorite food was served. So I think I want to set the tone that the best parties are the ones you don't feel like you're just waiting around to fit in and you don't want to leave because you're being made to feel like it's your own party. So I shared a few identities earlier, which have influenced how I exist in the world. Those identities followed me into Emmanuel. And at the time, I didn't even know that terms like DE&I, predominantly white institution, or a sense of belonging were a thing. In September of 2018, if you had told me this party analogy, I would have definitely told you that I was still waiting around to fit in. It was not long before I was offered a refreshment and invited to dance, which then allowed me to start giving suggestions on the music we played and the foods that we served, quite literally. My first semester, I was already on the executive board of the Emmanuel College programming team. And for those of you who are unfamiliar, the programming team is responsible for putting on large-scale events. I started as the director of seasonal events and got to plan the fall fair and our beloved Moonlight Breakfast. I had no idea I was coming into a predominantly white institution, and I didn't even know that that existed. I'm sure you're sensing a pattern here of things that I didn't know. Yeah, that was my life as a first-generation college student. I had visited Emmanuel a handful of times since my sophomore year of high school and had decided that that was the school I wanted to go to. And during my visits here, I had noticed that I didn't quite see Black people. I did always visit around wintertime, so I convinced myself it was because Black people don't come out in the cold. And also coming from Brockton, one of the most diverse cities in the state, I assumed that all places were diverse. And I want to pause here and emphasize that being Black at Emmanuel is not a one-size-fits-all experience. I am very appreciative of my time at Emmanuel because of how it helped me find my passion for equity, introduced me to the field of sociology, and gave me irreplaceable friends and mentors. The truth is that the journey as a Black person in a predominantly white environment is undoubtedly hard, and we're all going to receive and deal with it in a different way. It's a larger conversation for another time, but within Emmanuel's gates, we live in a microcosm of the world outside. Students have experienced microaggressions and racism and biases, and that has affected so much of our experience. The culture shock that I experienced at Emmanuel included microaggressions and oftentimes being the only Black person in the classroom. So those experiences did play a huge role in the equity-based work that I did and continue to do. I talked a little bit earlier about being raised by women who modeled strength and independence and didn't allow me to be anything but. So naturally, I felt like I had to learn to deal with it. My first ever sociology course was with Dr. Krish, who was on the call. Thank you for being here. And that is where I learned about the distribution of power. And I used a lot of what I learned in that course to figure out how to get into the system to better my own experience. I joined the Black Student Union at the point where we were ready to put out yet another list of demands, or as we called it, a call to action. This is when I started to get involved in policy change and implementation. This is when I started questioning why ECPT, the programming team, with the budget and audience that it had, could not seem to retain Black students at their events. This is when I became an RA and realized that there were so many conversations around staff demographics and the standards that we were being held to that we needed to address. I found my belonging in being able to be a stakeholder in the system who got to use her voice and would encourage her community to do the same. I found my belonging in not having to code switch like I had learned to do so throughout life. I was able to exist as myself in every room I stepped into at Emmanuel confidently, not because Emmanuel has figured out all their D&I and belonging related issues, but because I had a diverse village of folks that stood in solidarity with me, and because I was involved in conversations that affected my experience, and because I was able not only to play my music, but allow my peers to play their own. The first few conversations we had about why Black students were not attending larger campus events to foster that sense of belonging that research says is so important is because our music was not being played and the e-boards did not feature folks who looked like us or shared similar experiences. The next conversations we had were about food options being served at events and many times not catering to folks' dietary needs. From there, we had conversations about celebrating Black culture and not always confining it to Black History Month or always highlighting our trauma. I was fueled by being able to create inclusive spaces where folks with varying identities could step into and feel like they too were stakeholders in the system, like they had the authority to make requests and that those requests would be respected. I always felt like, as the big sister that I am, that I had a responsibility to those that come after me, which is what I kept in mind as I pushed for equity-driven solutions. If I If I, even through the positive lens of feeling like I belong, could still be made to feel like a second-class citizen, then surely it could happen to others who look like me. I also want to say that I don't want anyone who is unfamiliar with the full story to put me on a pedestal, because I am a sum of people who made changes happen with me, and people who coached me through these very difficult moments, and people who educated me and my Black peers at Emmanuel before, during, and after my time there as a student had ended. And what you see here on the screen is just a few pictures of my time at Emmanuel, of moments of involvement stemming from my first year at Emmanuel all the way through my senior year. And there is not a slide that is big enough to add pictures of everyone that has influenced my experience. And I think that looking back, I do wish I had taken more pictures, even though I have so many, but I still feel like I need more. So transitioning now, currently I serve as the volunteer program manager and co-chair for the DE&I committee at 826 Boston. Like Ellen has said before, we are a writing, tutoring, and publishing organization based in Roxbury. We offer many different educational programs, partnering with educators in the Boston Public Schools on academic projects and to publish student work. We also run different workshops such as College Essay Bootcamp, Science Fair Bootcamp, and an after-school program out of our center in Eggleston Square. My role encompasses leading the team that conducts volunteer recruitment, onboarding, engagement, and retention. In fact, if you're interested in a volunteer opportunity, I wouldn't be fully committed to my job if I didn't say I would love to talk to you more about what that looks like. I currently supervise 3 full-time AmeriCorps service members and 1 part-time intern. I applied and was hired, so we know that I'm qualified. But I would be lying if I said that imposter syndrome doesn't make me question myself at least once a week. Existing as the youngest person in a mid-level position at an organization that is always asking themselves how they can be better is a true challenge that has proven to be both a learning experience and has caused me to expand on everything that I was already conceptualizing during undergrad. To be completely honest, Emmanuel was a party I never wanted to leave because it felt my own. Don't get me wrong, by the end there, I was ready to have my degree and not be back anymore, but there was definitely a fear that came with leaving behind a community that made me feel safe. I'm happy to report that it has been 9 months, and although I don't physically sit in CDEI with FIA every day or host events in the JYC with the Black Student Union anymore, but the village that I built while at Emmanuel is still as present as ever. I am now on a journey of building my DE&I and belonging party at 826 Boston. Every day in my role, I'm expanding on how to make sure we are upholding values that are equity driven and inclusive. Since COVID-19, we have had to become creative with what volunteering looks like. I wholeheartedly believe that it has to be transactional, and we have to be very honest about who has the flexibilities in their lives to volunteer. Knowing what we know, we have to put systems in place where we can recruit volunteers who embody our mission and our representations of the students we serve in programming, even when those folks are traditionally the ones that are not able to have the access to volunteer. Our team is constantly engaging volunteers and analyzing their experiences, and that takes building an intentional community by setting norms around sharing your truth, knowing when to take space and when to step back. And it's about emphasizing that this relationship functions both ways. And while I am taking something from you, you will need to take something from me in return. Additionally, beyond creating intentional community with volunteers, I have had to create community with those I supervise. I wanted to make sure that when I met my team, I set an environment for us all to exist as ourselves. I'm learning that the imposter syndrome you feel in college is multiplied in a professional setting. To me, belonging is about having autonomy, and I have made it very clear and continue to make it clear to service members through my actions that I would entrust them to make decisions alongside me. And for us all to feel comfortable with that, we had to form a community. One identity we all had in common is that we're young 20-somethings trying to figure out life, and some days we just need a moment. On my team, you get to take several moments. We name burnout and we name imposter syndrome, and I as a supervisor had to set that tone. My goal was not to create unachievable expectations for us as humans. We needed to find a way to acknowledge our needs while still being able to serve the mission at 826 Boston. I'm also learning that it's a fine line to balance, since you still have to assert yourself as the leader of the team, but I also didn't want to enforce practices that were not sustainable to us. I have had to always be aware that disparities exist between myself as a full-time staff member and those I supervise, beginning with the fact that the pay a full-time staff member receives is astronomically different than the pay of an AmeriCorps service member or an intern. And there's an unequal distribution of power there that is also present. Part of building community is about being honest about that and adjusting expectations you have for folks on your team so that they're accurately compensated for their labor. I also make sure to try to get to know my team members individually and as a whole before we even started doing our work. I felt it important to know what experiences they've had and how that shaped their assumptions. I was interested in their goals and what they wanted to get out of a service year. So we had conversations about who they were in a professional setting and how I could support them through it. This was challenges, as I am living the exact same moment in my life as they are, trying to figure out who I am in a professional setting and what things still matter to me and what things I'm still trying to learn. I want to point out that I am a Black woman and all the service members on my team are white. I recently had some team feedback to share that would change the dynamic of how we've been doing our work so far. I felt nervous about sharing this feedback, not because I am afraid of confrontation or don't have the skills to communicate effectively, but because what I've internalized about how Black women are often perceived when they assert themselves. I shared this challenge with my supervisor and made it very clear that I did not need help with what to say. I just wanted to share the script that I had outlined with him. So should the opposite of my intent be what he receives back, he's already been briefed about it. I'm not sure how many of you have felt this feeling, but it was not great to know that I could do something and do it well, but still question how it would be received due to my identity. These thoughts show up a lot for me, and I try to name them and be honest with those I work with. I have learned to be an open and vulnerable person when it comes to my identities, but that's the exact opposite of the person I was before. And it took being in a space where I felt like I could open up to then start to unpack a lot of the internalized biases that I had consumed. And I'm not pushing anyone to feel the need to be that way, but I will say that it works for me and being intentional and creating trust within the communities that I frequent the most. Even when we do build community intentionally and put a lot of effort into making sure that folks feel safe in a space, there will still be times of doubt and uncertainty that will come up, but it's important to have laid that foundation so that you do feel like you're able to name it. So I shared this experience with you to tie together how much building intentional community has intersected with our identities and our experiences. I took the time to build the relationships with team members and have reflected with them for the past few months, so I know how they best receive information, and I continue to practice crafting messages that are intentional and clear. I'm only 9 months into my career and still learning so much about my place as a leader and my role in creating a sense of belonging in spaces I am leading. But my time at Emmanuel helped me pick up on some practices, and I still use them today. I'm not sure what that will look like in 10, 15 years from now. I'm still very fresh right out of college, but I definitely keep in mind the experiences that I had, even the ones that I had that I thought were small things, like talking about the food that we were serving at events, and if they met like different dietary needs, are things that I still think about today. And I also think about like big monumental policy changes, like for example, when I worked with Jeff Smith on bias incident related policies, and that's something that I still take into my work today. Like Ellen said, I'm currently applying to educational leadership master's programs because I know that with my goal of creating communities in educational institutions where both educators and students alike feel like this is their party and will play their music is not a small challenge. And I'm excited for the rest of the journey and how much I'll continue to become a better version of myself in this setting. So I'm going to end here to basically say thank you for listening, but also I would like to, like I said earlier, I would like this to be an environment where you are all sharing the stage with me as well. I really feel like I'm far from the expert when it comes to these conversations, but I think that none of us really get to take up that role. We take it up together, and that's the work that I try to do. So thank you all. And I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thank you. Wow. You're wonderful. I appreciate it so much that you're with us today, and am so impressed. Really, I'm so thankful. I mean that you're crediting Emmanuel for all of this, and for, I think so much of that goes to your personality and your strengths, Daniela, too. Emmanuel, it sounds, played a great part in bringing you to the leader that you are, which is just but credit to you as well. That's a great job. Great job. I love it. I love it. So now we'll open it up to questions for Daniela. Please feel free to raise your hand if that's comfortable for you, or I didn't see any questions in the chat per se, or in the questions and answers. If you did submit that, just let me know and I'll read it out loud. But yeah, Patty Crees, little shout out there. Yeah.
Thank you.
Gianna Kittle says, "Go Daniela, that's my best friend." It's nice to have your best friends on the call. It's nice.
Exactly.
It looks like Ivy has a question. Go ahead, Ivy. You can unmute.
Daniela, it's such a treat to get to see you. And actually, I'm so sorry that I had to step out at the beginning, but I did hear toward the end when you just mentioned, where I'm going with this question, Daniela, how amazingly transformative and putting your power into action, your work to add the statement onto all of our syllabi has been. And I still talk about it in my classes. I just mentioned you in my public health class. And I'm curious if you could just share a little bit more about how you found the strength to do that. The one piece of feedback that I had from students was, I don't know that I ever could have accomplished something big like that as a student. So I said I would ask you if you had some tips for the people who are sitting in these classrooms right now about how you really were able to get so much valuable work done.
Yeah. I oftentimes, when I reflect, don't really know exactly, like I said earlier, how all that happened in what feels like a very short time. I feel like I credit a lot of the work I did to my village, my community, the folks that were a part of everything that I did at Emmanuel, from you, Dr. Curl and Dr. Krish, Dr. Silver, all the way to staff and faculty members who are also on the call themselves, and my friends. I mean, I think folks that spent every day with me knew that I was always like ready for the next thing. I am a very action-oriented person. It's very rare that I'm sitting still, when if I see something, I have to do something about it. But I never did anything alone. When it came to bias incident reporting, it was something that, by the time I had joined the Black Student Union, the call to action was already drafted and we were on the final stages. So the items had already been picked out. So I do not take credit for that. What we had worked on, what by the time I joined, we were working on refining each subject, which involved a lot of research. And I think we were assigning, I think the way it happened with this specific one was we were assigning each of us had like one specific action item that we would like do the research on and refine it to make sure that we knew what it was when folks had asked us questions and we knew how to talk about it. So that was the one that I happened to be assigned and that I happened to choose. And a lot of the work that I did with that was with Jeff Smith, who's on the call. Jeff honestly like made a huge part of my Emmanuel experience, where the work on revising the process and creating a process, I will give him all the credit for that. What I really worked on with him was making sure we got it out to students. And that started with student leaders. And that work made it so that I had meetings with directors of residence life and with the president's office and with anybody from student involvement, anybody that I can get into a conversation with. We used to always also have a working group with professors and share, like, this is the item, this is why it's important, and this is where you come in helping us make that happen. So none of the work that I did was on my own. And we all took a piece of it that made sense for our roles. My role specifically being a student and being a student leader, and making that happen. And in terms of it getting put onto syllabi, that was something that I remember working on this, and then being in Dr. Curl's social work class at the beginning of semester, and her reading the statement and me feeling so proud of the work that we had done, because it was something that hadn't happened before. And Dr. Curl really took time to explain the importance of why that was something, why it mattered that it made it onto the syllabus. So I credit you for that work as well. And I credit anyone that does take the time to really share a little bit about it.
Thanks so much.
Daniela. Oh, good. Thank you, Ivy. Go ahead I didn't mean to interrupt you.
I just want to say thank you so much. It really, to this day, Daniela, it's part of the start of every class, and students that you've never met are proud of the accomplishments that you have. You really paved the way for students to feel like they could really get things done. So you're still very much alive in the classroom here.
Thank you. Love to hear that.
Can I ask a question? I know you're talking about a statement that's made. For anybody who doesn't know what that specifically is, Daniela, would you or Ivy be able to clarify that, just so that we're all aware?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, so I can clarify, and I definitely recognize there are students that are just recently got into Emmanuel. So this is not something that's, I guess, like, specific to Emmanuel. Black students across colleges in the United States for years have been releasing what is like nationally known as a list of demands. And basically this is a list that they put together of items that would make their experiences and the experiences of students at their colleges more equitable and more inclusive. So what we're specifically talking about was our own list of demands that we released in 2019 that we titled A Call to Action. So we just changed the name a little bit. So it's titled We the Students, A Call to Action. And on that document, we had 9 action items. It is actually still available for you to browse, and a lot has come from it, but there were a lot of 9 action items where we were basically pushing Emmanuel to become a more equitable institution, not only for Black students, but for all students. And items on the list ranged from more diverse faculty and staff to opportunities for students to, to access like things like study abroad and extracurricular activities, but also creating some study abroad opportunities that were just not focused on Western and European countries. So, and if we did have some opportunities that were to go to, let's say, for example, a country in Africa or a predominantly Black country, that they wouldn't be just for service, they wouldn't just be service-based trips, so that we got to celebrate those countries and the things that they had to offer, rather than just going there with our savior mentalities of we're coming to do something for you. And that's where I learned that things have to be transactional, especially in volunteering. Other things on the list included, things are escaping me, Jeff, if you have, I just remembered, the Equity Committee, which is still a committee at Emmanuel today. We basically asked for a committee to be formed with students, faculty, and staff. And I'm pretty sure Dr. Silver has been a part of that committee since the beginning. And basically what we said was that as students, we were the ones to put forth that document, but we recognized that our roles was as students, and we were at Emmanuel for a specific reason, which was to get our education. So it was not our responsibility to make those things happen as much as we oftentimes probably felt like it was our responsibility. We wanted a committee to be able to oversee those items. Some things have happened, other things haven't happened. And I would say it's still constant work. And you are probably part of things that came from the call to action without even knowing that the document was something that we had released.
Thank you so much for clarifying that. Well done. Good job. Thank you for spearheading that and for your work with Jeff. And thank you, Ivy, for pointing that out, that Daniela's legacy lives on at Emmanuel. Jeff, it looked like you had a question. You raised your hand. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Good to see everyone. For those who don't know me, I'm Jeff Smith. I used to work at Emmanuel in the Center for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. So I see so many friends and colleagues here. It's great to see everyone. But Daniela, excellent work. I'm just thrilled to see you as a professional doing the work that you talked about years ago, literally 5 years ago. It's really it warms my heart to see that you're authentic. You've always been authentic, and yeah, I just feel like this is such a great continuation of the work that you had envisioned for yourself years ago. So you were talking about the work on the bias incident, bias incident response policy. I was thinking about some of the conversations we were having, and we were talking about like generational differences, and you were talking about, as a young person in a college institution, an institution of higher education, you were finding your voice. I think you did an excellent job telling us about how you found your voice as a leader in your new organization. So for maybe some of the younger folks in the call, folks who are going to be starting their careers, what advice do you have for them to really affect change in the organizations or institutions they'll be entering as they begin their career? Because I feel like you had the experiences to really prepare you for the work that you're doing now, but if maybe folks don't have those experiences in college, what can they do so they can get to that first step in their career and make sure that they're a positive, productive force in whatever organization they're part of?
Yeah, I have 2 answers. My first answer is going to be find you a Jeff, and I mean that wholeheartedly. I met Jeff my first year at Emmanuel. I just went up to him and I introduced myself. And from then on, we had been able to form a relationship. Even to this day, whenever anything happens at work, Jeff can let you know. I will send him a text like, this thing happened. This is how I feel about it. How should I proceed? So that's part one. And I wholeheartedly believe that. Find mentors that really help you become a better version of yourself. And another thing that I learned in sociology, I will say I can also talk about sociology all day, obsessed. But I had learned about being a first generation college student and things that I didn't know that I could and should do. For example, forming relationships with professors. I didn't know that that would be something that would be beneficial to me. I didn't know that that was something that some folks knew that they could do that. So I appreciated that that was something that was named in my sociology courses. I think we should also name that in every course, because I was able to find people in all different areas. I really want to point out, Dr. Silver, I've never taken a class with Dr. Silver, and never took a political science class, but was still someone that I could go to. There was things that we had in common. There were things that he knew a lot about that I was interested in. So you can form relationships with folks even outside of the courses that you're taking. So I think on my journey to becoming someone that is I would say very confident in being able to make change, or not always make change happen, but really put my best effort and try, is to find mentors that will be able to stand with you through that process, because it's not easy. And like I said, I'm still very young, and yes, I did so much at Emmanuel, but it's so different in a professional setting. The confidence that I had and the ability to be able to go see Jeff or go see someone else at really whenever I felt like it doesn't really exist at the beginning of, at least didn't exist for me at the beginning of my career. So being able to find those people, you have to be the one to do that work. Because if we really think about it, numbers wise, there's one professor and there's hundreds of students, right? So it's much easier for you to go to them than it might be for them to then sit and meet all those hundreds of students and try to find those things in common. So take that initiative as my first piece of advice. And I would say the next piece of advice is to really try to like be very honest about who you are and what your skill set is. On this call, we're specifically talking about all my strengths, and I love that, but there are also areas of growth for me, and I try to be very transparent with myself about the things that I can do and the skills that I have possessed, but also the areas that like I can grow and I can become better. And I use the folks around me to be able to fill in the gaps, right? So before I started at Emmanuel, I actually hated working on teams, and I did not like working with people. After I left Emmanuel, it's my favorite thing to do. I love being able to get together and work with people. And a lot of that is because we bring so many different things to the table. So if you have something that you like, a policy that you think needs to be changed, or something that's inequitable in the space that you're filling in, know that most likely you're not the only one feeling that. And somebody needs to be the one to say something, and you don't necessarily have to feel like that's you, but you need to find, and I don't use this word a lot, but you need to find your allies in the game in terms of making things happen, because I've said this the whole time, none of what I did was on my own. None of what I did was on my own. So find your community of people that will uplift you and that will stand with you. And those are the two things I said are two very hard things to do and require a lot of initiative on your part, but be very honest with yourself with the skills that you have and the areas where things can be filled in. And I think things happen naturally, not quickly, but naturally.
Finding your village is so key, Daniela. That's such a great point, and nice of you to give that credit. I think the teams part is a kind of a universal, but you learn to embrace it and love it after a little while. But those group projects in school, there's always that one person who lets you down every time. But you look at that as an opportunity to help that person and just kind of let them participate at what they're willing to give. So any other questions? If not, we can wrap up, but I don't want to, anybody can put anything in the chat. Okay, no questions. I'm gonna give my little wrap up spiel, but if you think of anything after, as I'm talking, please feel free to chime in. Okay. Now, 1 second, let me get here. So I am really happy to share that we have a number of events, including on-campus events, planned for this spring, and I encourage you to visit the alumni website frequently, as we are continually adding new events and registration information. I'm going to hit send right here, and everybody will have a link to that website in the chat. We are constantly updating that page, so please feel free with new registration links. Visit that often. To check out all of our new alumni news, alumni links to profiles, etc. Our second 2023 Alumni Spotlight speaker is scheduled for Wednesday, February 22nd, again at 12 noon, and that will feature Akiana Smith, Emmanuel College class of 2015, and the Public Programs Manager at She Geeks Out, which is an organization based here in Boston. Please watch the alumni website for that registration link, which will be posted shortly. I'm also happy to announce that our 10th anniversary Dorothy Day Lecture will take place on Sunday, April 23rd. This features Amy Goodman, who's an author, journalist, and the award-winning host of a program and podcast called Democracy Now! A registration link to attend that event either in person or to receive a recording afterwards will be online in February. Amy will be presenting on independent media, why it matters for democracy, and why it works. Also sharing a save the date. Please mark your calendars now for Alumni Weekend 2023, which will take place June 2nd, Friday, June 2nd through Sunday, June 4th. In addition to special events being offered for class years ending in 3 and 8, reunion class years ending in 3 and 8, we will also be offering a number of events open to all alumni. Everyone is invited to come back to campus to reconnect and celebrate. Again, registration links for all alumni events can be found on the alumni website. Please be sure to check our website frequently as we're continually adding new things. If I'm just looking to see if there's any hands raised or any questions in the chat. Otherwise, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank everyone for joining us today. And I'd like to especially thank our special guest, Daniela Rodrigues. Very impressive. You're just such an impressive, like young alum. I'm so honored that you shared your time and your talent with us today. Thank you so much. Kristen Frazier, lovely to hear from you, Daniela. Come visit soon. Yeah, I hope we see you back on campus soon. Proud of you, Daniela. Keep up the great work. You have a lot of fans. You have more fans now than you did an hour ago. You can say something if you like. Go ahead, please feel free.
No, I was just gonna say thank you. It's so awesome to see a chunk of my village here, but also see some new folks. And I mean, my time I'm still very close to Emmanuel in Roxbury. So Kristen, you'll probably see me soon. Still connected to Emmanuel in so many different ways. I have a service learning course that volunteers with 826 Boston, and being able to link that partnership and keep Emmanuel linked to everything I do. It's super special to me. So I appreciate that.
I don't know if everybody saw the news that Emmanuel just added a DEI certificate course this spring. Alexis, can you find that? And we can share that in the chat as well, a link to that for information on that. I do think that the first cohort of that is it filled up very fast, which is really nice. It's important work. And it's also, thank you, Alexis just shared that. That's through our continuing education, graduate and professional programs. We are offering that certificate program in diversity, equity, and inclusion. So that's in the chat. So this recording to this session will be available online within the next few days. And with that, I hope everybody has a wonderful afternoon. Any final thoughts or questions? Now is your time. Otherwise, we will let everybody go and get back to their day. But thank you, Daniela, for joining us. Thank you, Alexis, for your help. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Ivy. Thank you for joining us, speaking up, and being part of our discussion today. Take care, everybody. Thank you, Daniela.
Thank you,
Thank
Daniela.
you.
Bye.
Bye.